Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Deku was trained by Madara Uchiha? Subscribe if you enjoy the video. And also check the description. So let's begin the story. The sludge fills his lungs in increments. That is the thing no one tells you about drowning, that it is not a single moment, but a sequence of small surrenders, each one quieter than the last, each one carrying less resistance than the one before it. Izuku Midoriya has read about drowning, because he has read about everything, because reading is the one form of preparation available to a boy who was told at 4 years old that his body was insufficient for the world it had been born into. He knows that the laryngospasm comes first, the throat sealing against the intrusion of foreign fluid, a reflex as old as vertebrate life. He knows that after the spasm releases, the body begins to aspirate. He knows that loss of consciousness follows hypoxia at a predictable rate. He knows all of this, and none of it helps him, because knowing the anatomy of a thing is not the same as surviving it. The sludge villain's body moves around him like a living architecture, not like water, which is passive and indifferent in its drowning, but like something with intention, something that presses against his face and works its way into the spaces between his teeth with the deliberate patience of an entity that has done this before and found it effective. It is warm. That surprises him. Each time a new tendril of it pushes past his lips and down toward the back of his throat. He had expected cold, because the things that kill you in nightmares are always cold. But this is almost body temperature, almost comfortable, and that wrongness is its own particular horror. Izuku's hands are still moving. He registers this distantly, with the part of his mind that never fully stops observing and cataloging even when the body has begun its negotiations with death. His hands are still clawing at the sludge, still tearing at the viscous mass with his bare fingernails, and finding nothing to grip, no purchase, no resistance, only the horrible yielding texture of something that has no structural integrity to destroy. Each handful he tears away reconstitutes itself behind his knuckles. Each attempt at clearing his airway is answered by the patient forward press of more material from directions he cannot see and cannot defend against. Stop, some analytical part of him observes, with the flat effect of a researcher noting the futility of a failed trial. The clawing is accelerating oxygen consumption. You are making it worse. He cannot stop. The body refuses the instruction. The body has its own opinions about dying, and they are entirely opposed to reasoned acceptance, and so his hands continue their useless tearing while the rest of him begins the longer, slower work of shutting down in sequence. His vision has gone strange at the edges, not dark, as he would have expected, but diffuse, the light from the tunnel mouth above him spreading and softening as his eyes lose the ability to focus on discrete objects. He can still see the opening, the circle of ordinary afternoon sky that represents the world he has not yet left, and there is a particular cruelty in its visibility, in the fact that his last sight is not darkness but that pale blue rectangle of out there, attainable by anyone with the power to take it, closed to him by the simple arithmetic of his own body's limitations. He thinks about his mother's hands. This is the thought that comes when the panic begins to loosen. Not his own face, not the notebook stacked 3 deep under his bed, not even Kaken's voice, which has narrated so many of his worst moments that he half expected it to score this one too. His mother's hands. The way they move when she is cooking, flour dusted to the wrist, moving through the familiar choreography of domesticity with the ease of long practice. The way they feel on the top of his head, heavier than they look, warm in a way that reaches past the skin. The way she said the night his quirklessness was confirmed, "I'm sorry, Izuku, I'm so sorry," not as accusation, not as prediction, but as the purest expression of helplessness a person can make, the acknowledgement that love sometimes arrives without the equipment to protect what it loves most. He wants to tell her something. He cannot think what. The sludge presses deeper, and the sky above him goes not dark but white. The whiteness is not light. This is the first thing Izuku understands when his consciousness reconstitutes itself in the place between places. The whiteness is not luminescence but absence, the visual equivalent of silence, a non-state that exists purely as contrast to the states that precede and follow it. He cannot tell if he is standing or floating. He cannot tell if he has a body, though when he looks down he seems to, rendered in the same unpolished detail as always, scuffed shoes, grass-stained knees, the fraying collar of his school uniform. He looks exactly like what he is, a small, unremarkable boy in second-hand clothes who has arrived somewhere he was not meant to. He is not afraid. This surprises him more than anything else. The fear, which had been so total and so physical in its final moments, has not followed him here. What remains is something quieter and less navigable, a kind of profound, suspension bridge stillness, as though the emotional infrastructure that supports terror and hope and grief is still present but has ceased, for the moment, to be load-bearing. He stands in the white silence and breathes in a space where breath serves no physiological purpose and simply is. He is aware of the presence before he sees it, in the way that you become aware of weather, not through any single sense, but through an aggregate of small atmospheric changes that precede the storm itself. The quality of the silence shifts. The absence that constitutes this place acquires a texture, a compression, as though the space has been forced to accommodate something that did not previously exist here and has not yet decided whether to allow it. Then Madara Uchiha steps out of the whiteness. He does not materialize. That word implies drama, the theatrical emergence of something choosing to be seen. He is simply not there, and then he is, in the manner of things that exist without permission and require no announcement. He is taller than Izuku's instincts prepared him for, not in the way that adults are tall to children, which is a comfortable and navigable tallness, but in the way of structures rather than people, the way a cliff face is tall, the way a collapsed mountain is tall. Tall in the sense that his scale seems like a property of his nature rather than his body. His hair falls around his face in the loose, dark architecture of someone for whom personal appearance has long since ceased to be a question of choice and has become simply a part of the landscape of himself. His eyes. Izuku has seen photographs of the Rinnegan, has read descriptions of it in the rare texts that acknowledge the existence of the shinobi world's mythological era, has filed it alongside six-armed deities and immortal war machines in the cabinet of his mind labeled historically significant, functionally irrelevant to my actual context. Nothing in those photographs or descriptions prepared him for the experience of being looked at by them. They are not frightening, exactly. Fear requires uncertainty, and these eyes contain no uncertainty whatsoever, not even the baseline uncertainty that constitutes ordinary consciousness. They are certain in the way that geological formations are certain, in the way that mathematical axioms are certain, in the way that things are certain when they have passed through every possible doubt, and come out the other side into something that is not confidence but resolution. They study him the way a surgeon studies a wound, not cruelty, not compassion. Assessment. Izuku discovers that he would almost prefer the cruelty. The figure, and he knows, somewhere beneath cognition, the way you know your own name in dreams, exactly who this is, does not speak immediately. He looks at Izuku for a length of time that the absence of normal physics makes impossible to measure, and Izuku, who has been stared at by people his whole life for reasons that always made him want to disappear, finds that he cannot look away from this particular gaze. It does not demand his attention. It simply has it, the way gravity has the attention of falling objects. You are not dead. The voice, when it comes, does not echo in the white space. It occupies it, fills its silences without displacing them. It is not loud. It is the kind of voice that has never needed volume. The kind of voice that has given orders in the middle of chaos and been heard, not because it was amplified but because something in its register makes the surrounding noise irrelevant. It is also, Izuku notes with the part of himself that keeps noting things no matter the circumstances, the voice of someone who has not spoken to a living person in a very long time. There is a quality of rust in it, beneath the certainty. The quality of a mechanism that still functions perfectly but has not been used in longer than mechanisms were designed to last. I know, Izuku says. The figure's expression does not change in any way that Izuku could describe with precision, and yet the atmosphere between them shifts slightly, the way a room's atmosphere shifts when someone in it reconsiders something they were about to say. You know you are not dead, the figure repeats, and it is not quite a question. I know I'm dying, Izuku clarifies, because the distinction matters to him the way distinctions always matter to him, because imprecision in language has always felt like a small betrayal of truth, and there is something about this space and this presence that makes the usual impulse toward precision feel suddenly urgent, morally weighted in ways he doesn't have words for yet. Not the same thing, I think. I can still feel it, the sludge. At the edges. I'm still there. Yes, the figure says. And then, After a pause that seems to constitute some form of reevaluation, most do not notice the distinction. Most people who end up here, most people who end up anywhere, the silence reconstitutes itself between them. Izuku, whose internal silence has never been comfortable, who has always filled quiet with questions and analysis and the half-articulate running commentary of a mind that cannot find a lower gear, stands inside this particular silence and feels it differently, not as absence to be filled but as the conditions for something, the way a field is a condition for weather. He looks at the figure that is not quite a man, that is something more archaeological than human, and he thinks, I know who you are. I know what you did. I know what they say about what you were and what you became and why. And underneath this, more quietly, I know that you are looking at me the way no one has ever looked at me before, which is to say you are looking at me as though I might be worth something. He does not say any of this. He has learned, in the particular school of a childhood spent navigating social hierarchies that were not designed for him, the survival value of keeping your most accurate observations to yourself until you understand the cost of speaking them. The figure looks at him for a moment longer. Then, you want to be a hero, not a question. A statement, delivered with the same flat diagnostic certainty with which you might observe that someone has a fever, not judgmental, not dismissive, simply noting a symptom. Yes, Izuku says, you have no power. No, you were told you cannot be one. Yes, and yet. The and yet hangs between them with a weight disproportionate to its size, the way small phrases sometimes carry the full freight of everything that cannot be said more directly. Izuku meets those ancient, impossible eyes and does not look away and does not agree and does not disagree, because and yet is correct, and yet is the most accurate description of his entire existence. The two words that sit beneath every entry in every notebook, beneath every analysis, beneath the desperate compulsive archiving of heroism in a boy who was told heroism was not available to him. And yet, the most stubborn thing in the human vocabulary. The thing that has no logical support, and persists anyway. Yes, he says again. And yet, something shifts in the quality of the figure's attention. Not quite the way a person's expression changes, but in the way a landscape changes when the light source moves. The same terrain rendered differently, new shadows thrown on familiar ground. The surgical quality of the gaze acquires something else, something older and less clinical, something that might, if Izuku had to name it, under duress, with the caveat that he could be completely wrong, be recognition. I have seen 10,000 soldiers who wanted to change the world, the figure says. I have seen warlords and sages and children who became weapons and weapons that learned to think they were children. I have never seen anyone who wanted what you want, not power, not victory, not legacy, but that specifically. The thing itself. The act of it. Izuku opens his mouth to say something and finds he has nothing, which is unusual enough to be worth noting. It is impractical, the figure continues, with what Izuku could almost swear is the ghost of something contemptuous but is, on closer inspection, something more complicated. The tone of someone who is criticizing a thing they cannot entirely bring themselves to dismiss. It is inefficient. It is the sentiment of someone who has not yet understood what the world costs, and who it charges. I know what it costs, Izuku says, and his voice comes out quieter than he intended, stripped of the performance that usually cushions his sincerity against the world's edges. I know exactly what it costs. I've been paying it my whole life and I haven't gotten anything for it yet, and I still. He stops. Steadies. And yet, the figure is quiet. In the quiet, Izuku becomes aware again of the sensation at the edges of this space. The distant, muffled pressure of the sludge, the body's remote reports from the world he has half left. He does not have long. He understands this without understanding how he understands it, the same way you understand in dreams that the landscape has rules even when you cannot articulate what they are. Why are you here? He asks. Because the question is the one that has been waiting underneath everything else since the moment the whiteness resolved into a presence, and he is running out of time to waste on preamble. The figure looks at him with those impossible eyes, and the answer, when it comes, is not what Izuku expected, not a speech, not a history, not an explanation of metaphysics. It is 4 words, delivered with the same flat economy as everything else, and it is the most honest thing anyone has ever said to him. I found you interesting. The silence that follows is different from the silences that preceded it. It is the silence of something about to change, weighted with imminence, textured with the specific quality of moments that will be divided by memory into before and after. There is a question I ask, the figure says. I have asked it of myself, over a very long time, in ways I do not recommend. I will ask it of you once, and you will answer or you will not answer, and whichever you choose will tell me everything I need to know about whether this conversation should continue. Izuku waits. The figure's gaze does not waver. Behind those ringed, ancient eyes, something that might be called attention, that might be called the focused weight of a consciousness that has outlasted nations, settles on Izuku with a completeness that makes him feel, for the first time in his life, entirely seen. Not seen in the way that Kaken sees him, which is as an irritant to be eliminated. Not seen in the way his teachers see him, which is as an inconvenient deviation from expected distribution, but seen in the way that, he will think about this later, many times, in the dark of his room with the notebook open to a blank page, that things are seen when the observer is genuinely curious about what they are looking at, when the looking is not instrumental but pure, an end in itself. Do you want, Madara Uchiha says, to be strong enough that no one is ever permitted to make you feel this way again? And here is where the moment demands its accounting, where the narrative requires that Izuku examine, honestly and without the flattering edits that memory usually applies to our worst moments, what this way feels like. Not the drowning. Not specifically the physical experience of the sludge villain's body in his lungs, the mechanical failure of oxygen supply, but the layer beneath that, the layer that was there before the sludge and will be there after it, the layer that has been there every day of his 14-year-old life with a consistency that makes it difficult to distinguish from his own character. This way, the way of being looked through rather than at. The way of occupying space in the world's peripheral vision, categorized and filed in the folder labeled insufficient, disregard. The way of watching Kaken blaze through every room he enters, every expectation confirmed and amplified. The universe arranging itself around his extraordinary gift with the smooth efficiency of a system designed for exactly this input, and knowing, with a precision that goes beyond feeling into something closer to mathematical certainty, that you are the negative space around that gift, the darkness that makes the brightness legible, present only as contrast. The way of wanting so completely that the wanting fills your entire interior landscape until there is no room for anything else, and discovering that wanting, in the arithmetic of a world that measures worth and power, counts for nothing at all. This way. Yes. He knows this way intimately. He has lived in it like a country. Yes, he says. The answer comes without hesitation, without the usual qualifications and second guesses and anxious self-auditing that precede almost every statement Izuku makes about himself. It comes from somewhere below his social performance layer, from the bedrock of him, the part that is not yet eroded by everything the world has said about what he is and isn't. It is the most unambiguous thing he has ever said, and he feels the truth of it reverberating in his chest like a struck bell, and he does not take it back. The figure looks at him for a long moment. Then he nods, not warmly, not with anything that could be mistaken for approval in its conventional sense, but with the specific nod of someone who has received the answer to a diagnostic question and found that the diagnosis is not what they expected. There is something at the very back of those ancient eyes, in the place where people who are still connected to their own humanity keep the things they do not intend to show, something that Izuku will not be able to name for months, that he will turn over and examine from different angles in the late nights that follow, that he will eventually identify, tentatively, as the specific emotion of someone who has waited a very long time for something and is only now beginning to suspect it might exist. Then we have something to discuss, the figure says. If you survive. How do I stop fighting the sludge? Izuku blinks. What? You have been fighting the sludge. Every bit of energy you waste on clawing at something you cannot grip is energy you cannot use elsewhere. Stop fighting what you cannot defeat with the tool you are using. The opening is above you. Your legs still function. The problem is not the sludge. The problem is your allocation of effort. And something about this, the brutal, practical, utterly unsentimental nature of it, the way it takes his imminent death and treats it not as tragedy but as inefficiency, the way it refuses to let even a crisis be anything other than a problem requiring analysis. Something about this cuts directly through the haze of hypoxic panic, and reaches the part of Izuku that has always, underneath everything, been capable of thinking clearly when given the right frame to think inside. The problem is allocation of effort. Stop clawing. Use the legs. Move upward. Don't die, the figure adds, with the tone of someone adding a minor logistical note to an otherwise complete briefing. I am not finished with you, he surfaces. Not gracefully. The return to the world of oxygen and light and sensation is about as far from graceful as anything Izuku has ever experienced. A convulsive, full-body rejection of the substance he's been marinated in for the past however many seconds. His lungs making demands on the air that border on violent. He is on his knees on the pavement, though he cannot clearly remember the process of arriving there. The afternoon sun is concrete and specific against his face in the way that sensory information always becomes specific after near absence. More real than usual, almost aggressively three-dimensional. The sounds and light of the ordinary world turned up past comfortable by the contrast of having almost left it. He is aware, at a distance, of voices. The sludge villain is still present. Some part of him registers this, the peripheral data of the ongoing situation. But his attention cannot quite orient itself toward external events yet, occupied as it is with the fundamental and apparently controversial project of continuing to breathe. He brings oxygen in and pushes it out, and brings it in again with the focused dedication of someone who has recently been reminded that this is not a process that operates itself. Kid, hey, stay with me. The voice is close. Someone is crouching beside him, or near him, a hero. The shape of the costume resolves itself as his vision consolidates. Someone with a containment-type quirk who has apparently managed to draw enough of the sludge away from him to allow this breathing arrangement to proceed. Izuku looks at the hero's face and processes it, and files it, and returns immediately to the inner event that is pressing against his consciousness with more force than anything in the external world. I am not finished with you. He sits on the wet pavement in the wreckage of an ordinary afternoon, coughing sludge and tasting blood at the back of his throat, and inside his chest something has shifted on its foundations, not the dramatic, narrative-satisfying shift of a plot point arriving, but the slow, tectonic, almost geological shift of a thing that was previously fixed becoming, incrementally, unstable. The world looks the same as it did an hour ago. The people in it look the same. He looks, presumably, the same, scraped knees, disheveled uniform, the unremarkable face of an unremarkable boy in a city that produces them in industrial quantities. But behind his eyes, in the space that was recently occupied by the white silence, and the presence within it, there is something that was not there before. It has no shape yet. It is not yet a voice, or a memory, or a lesson. It is something more fundamental than any of those, a change in the quality of space, the way a room feels different after something significant has been moved. Even if you cannot identify precisely what it is, Izuku will think later, what a door feels like from the inside when someone has, for the first time, knocked on it from the other side. He does not tell the hero any of this. He accepts the hand that is extended to help him up, says the things you say in these situations. I'm okay, I'm sorry, I don't know how it happened. Performs the social choreography of the rescued civilian with the automatic competence of someone who has spent their life learning which truths are safe to speak aloud and which ones should be kept in the notebooks, kept in the interior, kept in the space where the world's assessments cannot reach them. Somewhere in the middle distance, a crowd has assembled around the spectacle, and people are filming things on their phones, and the ordinary machinery of incident aftermath is grinding into motion. Izuku stands up straight and finds his balance, and looks at his hands, still trembling, he notes, because the adrenaline has not received the memo about the crisis being technically over, and does the thing that is most essentially himself, the thing he has never been able to stop doing regardless of the circumstances in which he finds himself. He observes. He observes the crowd and the way they have arranged themselves. The pull between voyeurism and fear, the front row of those drawn by spectacle who have forgotten to be afraid, the outer ring of those whose fear has outrun their curiosity. He observes the hero securing the villain, the efficient movements of someone who has done this specific type of work many times, the muscle memory underneath the performance of authority. He observes the afternoon light, which has taken on the particular bronze quality of late sun, and registers with some portion of his mind that this is beautiful and that he is glad, for reasons that have nothing to do with aesthetics, to be in a world where light still functions. And then, because he is Izuku Midoriya and he cannot help himself, he reaches into his bag, which has somehow survived the whole of this, and takes out the notebook labeled Hero Analysis for the Future volume. 13 and opens it to a clean page. His handwriting, when it comes, is less steady than usual. The letters have the particular quality of writing done by hands that are not fully under conscious control yet, slightly too large, slightly irregular, the pressure of the pen varying with the unevenness of still metabolizing adrenaline. But the content is precise. The content is always precise. At the top of the new page, he writes the hero's name, his quirk parameters, the structural limitations he observed in the containment technique. 3 points, specific, each one the seed of a fuller analysis that will follow later when his hands are steadier, and his mind has settled back into its normal register. Beneath this, after a pause in which the pen hovers over the page with the particular suspension of someone deciding whether to commit an observation to permanence, he writes something else. Not hero analysis, not tactical notation. Something that has no category in the existing organizational schema of the 14 notebooks that preceded this one. There was something in the space between. He looks at this sentence for a long time. Then, below it, I think I agreed to something. He closes the notebook. The bronze light has shifted, moving toward evening now, and the crowd is beginning to disperse with the satisfied restlessness of people who have witnessed something that will become a story told in varying degrees of embellishment. And the hero is completing her paperwork, and the villain is contained, and the world is in the process of returning to its normal register of ordinary catastrophe and ordinary beauty and ordinary, continuous, exhausting demand. Izuku puts the notebook in his bag and stands in the light and breathes. Around him the city moves, its enormous, indifferent, magnificent life proceeding without reference to any individual's participation in it. He has been almost swallowed by it today, literally and otherwise, and it has not noticed, and it would not have noticed if he hadn't come back, because the city does not have opinions about the individuals it contains. The city simply is. And he simply is. And somewhere in a space between waking and wherever he nearly went, something ancient and exhausted and impossibly vast has decided, for reasons he doesn't yet understand, that he is interesting enough to warrant attention. He is, beneath the fear and the trembling and the lingering taste of sludge and adrenaline, aware of something else. Something small and cautious and not yet willing to be named too precisely. The way you try not to name good things too soon for fear the naming will disturb them. It feels, though he barely dares think the word even in his most interior, it feels, a little, like possibility. That night, Izuku Midoriya folds her hands in her lap and watches her son eat dinner with the concentration of a mother who has learned to read the text beneath the text, to look at the set of his shoulders, the quality of his silences, the way he holds his chopsticks when something is working on him from the inside. She sees the remnant rawness at his knuckles, the slight hoarseness when he says yes to the question of how was school, and she does not ask what happened because she has learned, in the accumulated practice of 14 years of parenting this particular child, that some things he needs to find his own way to say. After dinner, she hears him in his room, the familiar scratch of pen on paper, the sound she has listened to since he was old enough to hold a pen, the sound that means he is processing something in the only way he has fully trusted since the world told him his body was insufficient. She stands in the hallway with her hand not quite touching the door and listens to the scratch of the pen and feels the specific weight of a love that cannot always protect what it loves. In his room, Izuku writes. He fills 2 pages with the accumulated analysis of the afternoon, the hero, the villain, the structural weaknesses of both containment methods employed, the tactical observation Madara. He writes the name for the first time, quickly, without looking at it directly, in the way you approach a thing that might not be there when you look directly at it, had provided in the white space. The analysis is the best he has ever done. It has a quality it has never had before. Not just observation but architecture, the framework of a mind that has been, for a single brief terrible illuminating moment, inside a perspective that sees combat the way other people see geometry. When the analysis is complete, he turns to a blank page. He writes at the top, things I don't know. This is not a new category, it is the most heavily populated category in the entire collection, the one that has always grown faster than any of the others. But tonight it has a particular entry that he writes very carefully, in handwriting more deliberate than usual. Whether it was real, he stares at this. Then, below it, whether it matters if it was. He thinks about the sensation that preceded his return to the surface. The sudden reorganization of his panic into analysis, The shift from clawing at something you cannot grip to the opening is above you. Use your legs. He thinks about how immediate it was, how clean, like a light being switched in a room that had previously operated on dimness as its default setting. He thinks about the voice that delivered the instruction, its flatness, its absolute absence of encouragement or warmth, the way it treated his potential death as a logistics problem with a workable solution. He thinks, no one has ever spoken to me like that. Not the way adults speak to a child they're trying to manage, not the way Kaken speaks to him as practice target, not the way the kind ones speak, gently, carefully, with the well-intentioned softness of people who know they're dealing with something fragile. The voice in the white space spoke to him the way you speak to something that you believe is capable of handling what you're about to say. As though the information were the point. As though he were the kind of person for whom accurate information were sufficient. He closes the notebook. Outside his window, the city is doing what cities do at night, contracting into its domestic self, the daytime performances packed away, the ordinary work of living proceeding in the warm-lit windows he can see from his desk. Somewhere out there, heroes are on patrol and villains are planning, and the enormous machinery of a powered world is grinding forward on its established tracks. And he is a quirkless 14-year-old in a second-hand uniform with no business being in the path of any of it. I am not finished with you. He puts his hand flat on the cover of the notebook. Under his palm, through the cardboard cover and all the pages and all the analysis and all the entries in the category things I don't know, he can feel the slight vibration of his own pulse. The body, still insisting on its continued operations, still doing the work it was doing before anyone consulted it about whether it was adequate for the tasks being proposed. He is still here. He is, improbably and by the narrowest of margins and possibly with assistance he does not yet understand, still here. Tomorrow he will run the beach route he has been mapping for 2 weeks, the route past the trash-strewn coast that no one else uses. Because something in the space behind his eyes has been building, since the afternoon's white silence, toward a preparation he cannot yet fully articulate but that his body seems to already understand. Tomorrow he will return to the notebooks with steadier hands. Tomorrow he will begin the longer work of figuring out which parts of what happened to him this afternoon were the ordinary near-death hallucinations of a hypoxic brain, and which parts were something else entirely. But tonight, for a little while longer, he sits at his desk in the lamplight with his hand on his notebook and lets himself simply be present in his own continued existence, attending to the specific, ordinary miracle of breathing, of the pen's weight in his fingers, of his mother's sounds from the kitchen, of the city's lights making their soft geometry in his window. He is 14 years old. He has been told, by everyone qualified to tell him, that the thing he wants most is not available to him. And yet, he picks up the pen. He opens to a new page. He writes, at the top, in careful deliberate letters, Chapter 1, What I Know About Starting from Nothing. Below this, after a pause in which the whole weight of the night and the afternoon, and the white space, and the ancient voice presses against the inside of his chest with something that is not quite hope but is, at least hope adjacent, something that requires hope's infrastructure even if it has not yet committed to hope's conclusions. He writes his first entry. The opening is above you. Stop clawing at what you can't grip. Use your legs. He looks at this for a long moment. Then, in smaller writing, in the margin, like an annotation, like a note to a self that will read this later and need reminding. Someone thought this was worth saying to me. Someone thought I was worth saying it to. I should probably not waste that. Outside, the city exhales into its own night. The lamplight holds its small warm circle against the dark. The notebook fills. Izuku Midoriya, who almost drowned today and didn't, keeps writing. The voice comes first in the space between sleep and waking. This is how it begins, not with drama, not with the theatrical rupture of another white silence crisis, but with the humbler, more insidious method of arrival that Izuku will later understand as entirely characteristic. Madara Uchiha, it turns out, does not announce himself. He does not knock. He simply inhabits the thresholds that already exist in Izuku's consciousness, the liminal cracks between states, the unguarded passages that every mind contains and most people traverse without ever noticing they are, for those few seconds, briefly nowhere, and he is there when Izuku passes through them. As immovable as the stone he resembles, as patient as something that stopped measuring time when time stopped mattering to it. The first morning after the sludge villain, Izuku surfaces from sleep at 5:47 a.m. to find the quality of his own silence changed. He lies on his back in the great pre-dawn of his room, the familiar topography of it, all-might posters and stacked notebooks and the specific weight of second-hand blankets washed too many times, and stares at the ceiling and breathes and becomes gradually aware that the interior of his head, which has always operated with the busy, ambient noise of a mind that cannot locate its own off switch, has a new texture. Not a voice yet. Not precisely. More like the pressure change that precedes weather, the atmospheric evidence of something immense occupying nearby space, displacing the ordinary density of his thoughts the way a large body displaces water. He sits up. His hands are steady. He looks at them as though confirming this, spreads his fingers in the thin morning light, and registers the absence of yesterday's trembling with a kind of impersonal curiosity, as though his own body is an experimental subject whose results are interesting but not yet conclusive. "You are checking whether I am real," the not-quite voice observes. "It lives," Izuku discovers, not in his ears but in some layer below them. Not sound but the neural ghost of sound, the brain's rendering of signal rather than signal itself. It is, somehow, more intimate than hearing. More unavoidable. You can close your ears against the sound, but you cannot close whatever this is. He does not startle. He notes this, the absence of the flinch he expected, the absence of the animal fear response that any reasonable person ought to have when discovering that their mind is not entirely their own, and does not know whether the steadiness reflects actual equanimity, or simply the kind of profound adaptation that occurs when the alternative is breaking down in his childhood bedroom at 5:47 in the morning, while his mother sleeps 10 feet away. "Both," he says quietly, to the ceiling, to the quality of the air that carries no sound. "I'm checking whether you're real and whether I've lost my mind. Those are not mutually exclusive conditions." That's not reassuring. It was not intended to be. The training, such as it is in those first 2 weeks, consists primarily of being watched. Izuku understands this only in retrospect. At the time it registers as frustrating absence, as the sense that the vast presence in the back of his mind is present but withheld, close enough to create atmospheric pressure but not close enough to actually do anything with. He asks, those first several mornings, for instruction, for technique, for the specific, actionable, transferable knowledge that his 14-year-old mind, shaped by years of filling notebooks with other people's capabilities, expects to be the medium of learning. Each time, Madara is quiet, not the silence of someone who hasn't heard the question, not the silence of someone formulating an answer, the silence of someone who is already doing something that the questioner has mistaken for nothing. "You are watching me," Izuku realizes on the 4th morning, standing in the kitchen making rice while his mother showers and the apartment fills with ordinary morning sounds. He says it not accusatorially but with the flat register of a hypothesis arriving at confirmation, the particular tone of the notebooks. "Yes. Why?" "Because you are interesting when you do not know you are being observed." A pause. "Different from when you do." Izuku opens his mouth. Closes it. This lands differently than he expected, not as invasion, though it is that too, but as something that sits uncomfortably adjacent to being known, which is a thing he has wanted for so long and in such specific terms that its arrival in this particular form, unasked for, lateral, delivered by a dead man who lives in his synapses, is producing an emotional response he cannot cleanly categorize. "What's different?" he asks, because the analytical reflex is always faster than the protective one. When you know you are being observed, you make yourself smaller. Shoulders forward. Steps measured. The breathing changes, shallower, controlled. You construct a presentation of yourself that is designed primarily to avoid notice. The voice carries no judgment, only the flat precision of a diagnosis. When you do not know, you are expansive. You look at things. You count things. You move your lips when you analyze something. When you pass something that interests you, you slow before you realize you have slowed. Izuku stands in his kitchen with a rice paddle in his hand and an expression on his face that is, for once, entirely unmanaged. "You have been doing this your whole life," Madara continues. The contraction. "It is so automatic you no longer notice you are doing it. You have internalized the world's assessment of you to such a degree that you have become its best enforcement mechanism." That's, Izuku starts. Stops. wants to argue and discovers that the argument he was preparing has no structural integrity. Puts it down. That's probably accurate. It is entirely accurate. A pause that feels, if pauses can feel things, almost, not gentle. Nothing about this voice is gentle, but calibrated, measured against some internal gauge of what is useful to say and when. I am not saying it to diminish you. I am saying it because you cannot correct what you do not understand, and you have understood your capabilities and your weaknesses as external facts, quirkless, inadequate, insufficient, rather than as choices. Some of what you believe about yourself is physics. Most of it is habit. The rice cooker clicks on. Somewhere in the apartment, water stops running. The morning proceeds. Izuku stirs the rice with a steadiness he is not certain he feels and thinks. Habit. Turns the word over. Examines its implications. Habits can be examined. Habits can be interrupted. Physics cannot. He has spent his entire life treating himself as physics. The formal sessions, if they can be called that, if anything conducted between a living boy's consciousness and the resident ghost of history's most catastrophic idealist can be called formal, begin on the 6th day, in the hour after school when Izuku takes his usual route through the underpass, and there is no one watching and the afternoon light comes in at angles that make the ordinary world look briefly, accidentally cinematic. Stop walking, Madara says. Izuku stops. Look at the space ahead of you. Not the destination, the space. Tell me what you see. Izuku looks. He describes, haltingly, the underpass. The graffiti, the cigarette burns on the concrete, the particular distribution of shadows from the angled supports, the 3 exit points, the acoustics he can infer from the way sound moves here. You describe the scenery, Madara says. There is no contempt in it, but there is something that functions as its dispassionate cousin, the quality of someone who expected approximately this and is adjusting their methodology accordingly. I asked what you see. You see a place you walk through. I am asking you to see a space in which events can occur, in which events are, at this moment, potential, shaped by every physical parameter you just described. A tactical reading, a complete reading. The difference between them is that tactics is only concerned with conflict. I am asking you to concern yourself with everything. Conflict is one type of event. What else could happen here? Izuku looks again. The underpass re-renders itself under this new instruction, his eyes moving differently, slower, picking at the details with the specific attention he usually reserves for hero analysis, for the notebooks, for the obsessive architectural reconstruction of other people's capabilities. He sees the high-traffic side versus the low-traffic side and what that implies about civilian patterns. The covered section near the left wall where someone has arranged cardboard, recently used, probably a shelter. The stress fractures in the support beam at the northern end, visible if you know to look, the kind of thing a structural engineer would note, and most people walk past every day for years. He describes these things. The quality of Madara's silence shifts slightly, imperceptibly, almost. But Izuku has been in this voice's company for 6 days and has already begun to develop the specific sensitivity to its textures that you develop when someone else's attention is the primary information source available to you. Better, Madara says. Not warmly. Not encouragingly. Better as a diagnostic observation, the way a doctor says better when looking at a wound that has begun to close. This becomes the shape of the lessons. Izuku moving through his ordinary world, and Madara making him look at it again, not once but 3 times, 4 times, the first look that sees the surface, the second that sees the structure beneath it, the third that sees the implications of the structure, the fourth that sees what the implications suggest about the people who created and inhabit the space. It is exhausting in a way that is entirely unlike physical exhaustion, a tiredness that lives behind the eyes, in the regions of the brain that are responsible for sustained analytical attention, which turns out to have a carrying capacity that a lifetime of hero watching has not nearly tested. You are going to give me a headache, Izuku tells him, on the 8th day, sitting on the wall at the edge of the harbor after 40 minutes of what Madara has termed environmental reading but which Izuku privately thinks of as being required to actually look at the world instead of just traveling through it. You have been traveling through your life, Madara says, which suggests either telepathy or, more likely, that the observation was simply obvious, without looking at it. The headache is the cost of correction. Pay it. This doesn't feel like combat training. No. When does the combat training start? When you can tell me, without looking, 3 structural weaknesses in the body language of the last person who spoke to you. Izuku opens his mouth, closes it, thinks about the last person who spoke to him, which was his homeroom teacher giving end-of-day announcements. Tries to reconstruct the body language from memory, finds, with a lurch of something that is half discomfort and half intellectual excitement, the specific feeling of discovering you are worse at something than you believed, that he was not attending to his teacher as a person with a body in space, but as a source of information, a talking head, the human interface of an institutional content delivery system. He realizes, been doing this his whole life. Listening to what people say and not watching what they are while they say it. Tracking the content of human communication while tuning out the entire channel through which most of it actually travels. That's deliberate, he says slowly, working it out as he speaks. I do that on purpose. If I watch too closely it feels presumptuous. Like I'm taking something I'm not supposed to have. The silence that follows has a different quality from the diagnostic silences. It is. Izuku turns this over carefully, not wanting to overclaim. It is the silence of something that has been waiting for a particular door to open and has just heard the handle turn. Yes, Madara says. You have made yourself an observer of the curated, the intended, the permitted presentation. You take only what is offered because you have learned to believe you have no right to more. A pause. This is not courtesy. This is another form of the contraction. You have built your perception around the premise that other people's privacy is more important than your own understanding of your situation. In most circumstances this is a social grace. In a fight it will kill you. I'm not in fights. You were, 6 days ago, losing one to a sludge villain. Izuku is quiet. You will be in more, Madara says, without the tone of prophecy, with the tone of someone observing basic arithmetic. You are walking toward a life built around conflict. You will be in a great many fights, and in those fights, the information you refuse to take will be precisely the information that determines whether you survive them. So I should, watch people without their consent? Analyze them as though they're opponents? I am suggesting you look at people as though they are people, Madara says, with a flatness that somehow conveys the entire weight of his considerable exasperation. Completely. Not the part they show you, all of it. It is not violation to observe accurately. It is the minimum courtesy of taking someone seriously enough to see them as they actually are rather than as they have decided to be for your benefit. Izuku sits with this for a long time, on his wall above the harbor, while the water does its inscrutable, patient thing below him. A muscle in his jaw is working, the specific tension of someone engaged in the internal revision of a belief they have held for long enough that it has been structural rather than simply held, load-bearing rather than merely believed. The revision of structural beliefs is a particular kind of pain. Not acute, not the sharp, clean pain of impact, but the slow, grinding, cellular pain of realignment, the sensation of something that has been held in one position being moved into another. You're telling me that making myself invisible is a choice I've been making, he says finally. And that I've been blaming the world for not seeing me, when I've been the one who wouldn't let myself be seen. The harbor water catches the afternoon light, and breaks it into small moving pieces. Somewhere above, a pair of heroes arc across the sky in the easy, native way of people whose bodies belong to the air, leaving behind the fine contrails of their passage through ordinary blue. Both can be true simultaneously, Madara says. The world genuinely does not make room for you. And you have made yourself easier to erase. Cause and consequence are not always distinct. Often they feed each other in cycles that are only visible from the outside. And you're the outside. I am considerably outside. Izuku almost smiles. Does not, quite. But the muscles involved make their opinion briefly known before he recollects himself. The Bakugo problem comes to a head on a Thursday, in the specific, grinding way that problems which have been accumulating for years tend to arrive, not dramatically, but with the tired inevitability of a dam that has been failing by degrees finally reaching the capacity of its last intact section. It is nothing new. It is, in fact, so old as to have become a kind of ambient condition. The way Bakugo moves down the hallway toward him, the particular way he takes up space, leading with the architecture of his own certainty, the way some people lead with shoulders and others lead with smiles. The way Izuku's body responds before his mind has consciously registered the input. The beginning of the familiar contraction, the shoulder roll inward, the lowering of eyes, the preparation of the social presentation that has been developed over years to present the minimum possible surface area to this particular force. Stop. The word arrives not as instruction but as observation, the flattest possible notification that something is occurring. Izuku stops. Not his feet. He keeps walking, same pace, same direction. But the contraction arrests itself mid-execution, and he is left in the unusual position of walking toward Bakugo in the upright, open posture of someone who has not yet received the news that they are supposed to be small. Bakugo's eyes, moving toward him with the habitual confidence of someone who expects the usual choreography, catch on the deviation the way a hand catches on a splinter, not hard, not dramatically, but with the specific snag of something unexpectedly present in a surface that should be smooth. Read him, Madara says. Not what he's showing. What the showing tells you. Izuku looks. Not the glance he usually manages, sidelong, minimizing, designed primarily to track threat rather than person, but the actual, deliberate, complete look that Madara has been teaching him to give spaces, now directed at a human being who is, structurally, also a space in which events occur. He sees the swagger that is 1 degree too large, the kind of excess that exists in compensation. The specific position of Bakugo's hands, loose, preemptively ready, because he is always preemptively ready, because something in him cannot afford to be caught unprepared. The way he looks directly at everything except the things that actually matter to him, the way his gaze skips past Izuku's face before it fully lands, registering and deflecting in a motion too fast to be conscious. He is afraid, Izuku realizes, with a lurch so complete it briefly restructures the entire architecture of his understanding. Not of Izuku specifically, not yet, anyway, and not in the simple fear of harm sense. But of what Izuku represents, of the thing Izuku keeps doing, the unacceptable thing, surviving. Still being there, still continuing, notebook in hand, eyes bright with an aspiration that refuses to accept the verdict his entire environment has rendered. There is something in Bakugo that cannot tolerate this, and it cannot tolerate it because he needs it to be impossible. He needs it to be impossible because if it is possible, enough, Madara says, almost gently for now. You are reading, not dissecting. Note the outline. Do not take the whole thing apart today. Bakugo is 3 meters away. 2. His mouth is already forming the familiar syllables, the old music of it, and Izuku looks at him. Directly. With the unhurried, complete attention of someone who has spent the last week learning to look at spaces in full, and has just extended that practice to the most important space in his immediate environment. He does not smile. Does not bristle. Does not perform the usual presentation of small, harmless, please do not start. He simply looks, with the calm of someone who is engaged in observation, and in his eyes, though he does not intend this, though it is purely the unintended consequence of actually attending fully to something rather than managing it at arm's length. In his eyes there is something new. Bakugo stops. Not completely. He doesn't stop walking, doesn't abandon the motion entirely, but there is a hitch in it, a fractional reorganization, the kind of micro-adjustment the body makes when the ground underfoot is not quite where it expected. He walks past, and does not say the thing he was going to say, and Izuku watches him go with an expression that is either triumph nor provocation, just the level, attending gaze of someone who has just learned something and is integrating it. Behind him, 3 of Bakugo's companions exchange a look that Izuku, who is now attending to everything, catches in his peripheral vision. It is the look of people who have witnessed something they didn't quite understand and are not sure whether to mention it. That evening, Izuku writes in the notebook, fear is not always loud. Sometimes it's the loudest thing in the room pretending to be something else. Below this, Madara's voice, rendered in writing as faithfully as he can manage. Every person who frightens you is afraid of something. Find the thing. You may never use the knowledge, but the search will change how you see the person, and that change will change how you move around them, and that movement is where half the fight happens before it begins. On the 11th night, Madara speaks unprompted for the first time. Izuku is doing push-ups, the beginning of what will become the beach training program, currently at a very early iteration that mostly demonstrates how far he has to go, and counting, and thinking about nothing in particular, and the voice arrives in that particular quality of mental vacancy that sustained physical effort sometimes produces, slipping into the cleared space like water into a vessel. I am going to tell you something I have not told anyone, Madara says. Not preamble. Not transition. Simply the statement, arriving in the middle of set 12 as though the decision to make it has been building for some time, and has simply reached its threshold. Izuku does not stop the push-ups. He has learned, is learning, that Madara speaks most honestly when the speaking is incidental, when it is not the declared point of the exercise. He says nothing, he breathes. He goes down and comes up. Goes down and comes up. I was 7 years old when I first understood that the world was arranged against my surviving in it, Madara says. Not against my flourishing. Against my basic continuation. The war between our clans was not a metaphor or a context. It was the literal condition of existence. That every person I loved was under a continuous obligation to become capable enough to justify the resources spent on their survival. Down. Up. Izuku's arms are beginning to shake slightly. He ignores this. I had a brother, Madara continues, with the flatness of someone describing something they have processed so completely it has become pure information, stripped of the effect that once accompanied it. Or so it sounds, until you attend to the specific quality of the flatness, and recognize it as the painstaking construction of a man who long ago decided that the only way to continue existing in the proximity of certain memories was to refuse to let them be emotional. Izuna. He had your quality. The one I identified in the white space. The will that does not break under the weight of its own inadequacy. He was smaller than I was, always. The runt of us. And he was incandescent, in the way that some people are, in the way that makes everything in their vicinity feel slightly more real for their presence in it. Push-up 16. 17. The arms are definitely shaking now. He died because I was not strong enough to prevent it, Madara says. That is the simple version. The longer version, which I spent decades believing was different from the simple version, is that I built an entire philosophy and then a movement, and then a war from the question of how to build a world where that kind of loss was structurally impossible, where the mathematics of the world could be changed so that its relationship with loss was different. 18. The concrete is cold under his hands. I was not wrong about the pain, Madara says. I was not wrong about what was broken. The world was arranged against survival in ways that were not natural or inevitable but constructed, maintained by the interested parties who benefited from the arrangement. I was correct about this. I remain correct about this. A pause. I was wrong about my right to be the answer. Izuku stops. His arms give out on push-up 19 and he doesn't fight it. Rolls onto his back on the floor of his room and stares at the ceiling with his chest heaving and the specific ache of muscles being rebuilt settling into his shoulders. The All Might poster looks back at him from the wall. That enormous, uncomplicated smile. The poster bright promise of a hero who is the answer. Who has always been the answer. Who was designed specifically to function as the answer to everything the world produces that is terrible. How do you know? Izuku asks. His voice comes out rougher than he intends, rough from the exertion, but something else too. Something about the proximity of the question to things he's been circling for 11 days. How do you know when the thing you want to build is actually good versus when it's just what you want, dressed up in the language of good? The silence is long enough that Izuku wonders if the question landed in the wrong place, touched something that is not available. Some wound in the architectural structure of Madara's consciousness that has its own keep-out perimeter even in the relative openness that these late-night hours seem to produce. Then, you cannot always know in advance, Madara says. This is the trap and also the reason that power requires, not checks, not governance, not the architecture of systems, though those matter. It requires the genuine capacity for the question. The question you just asked? Most people who become powerful enough to be dangerous have already, by the time they reach that power, stopped asking it. The power itself becomes the answer to every question, including the questions about whether the power is good. Then how? Keep asking it. Even when, especially when, you are certain. Especially when you have won. Especially when everyone around you has agreed that you are right. That is precisely when the question matters most, and precisely when it becomes hardest to ask. A pause. You have something I did not have. What? You grew up being told you were not enough. I grew up being told I was extraordinary. The flatness of this contains something that is not quite irony but functions similarly. The recognition, from a great distance, of a structural fact about one's own formation. The first instills a kind of hunger that must be carefully managed. The second instills a kind of certainty that is almost impossible to dislodge. Yours is the more dangerous fuel but the more correctable flaw. You're saying being quirkless is an advantage. I am saying that having been told you are insufficient for the world may be the only thing that saves you from the particular failure that destroyed me. A pause. Do not mistake this for comfort. It is not comfort. It is a reframing of a liability as a potential asset under specific conditions. The conditions are, you must choose, consciously and repeatedly, to translate the experience of insufficiency into curiosity rather than certainty. Into questions rather than answers. Izuku lies on his back on the floor of his childhood bedroom, surrounded by the artifacts of his aspirations, the notebooks, the posters, the accumulated evidence of a self that was built around wanting something the world said was unavailable, and breathes, and thinks, and feels the familiar shape of his own wanting settled differently inside him. Not less. Not quieter. But different, the way the same amount of water is different when poured into a different vessel. The wanting is the same. Something about the container is beginning to change. He sounds like he was worth it, Izuku says quietly. Your brother. The incandescent one. The silence that follows is the longest Madara has produced. It is the silence of a man who has had this specific door opened and has, for reasons both practical and self-protective, kept it closed for longer than most civilizations have existed. And something about the hour, or the tiredness, or the fact that there is no performance available to a dead man that can actually cost him anything now, something produces a very slight, very incomplete lowering of that particular barrier. Yes, Madara says. And nothing else. But the word carries, in its single syllable, the full weight of everything that was lost and everything that was broken in the losing and everything that was built wrong in the attempt to answer it. It is, Izuku recognizes, with the instinct that has been sharpening all week, the most honest thing Madara has said. Not the philosophy. Not the tactical frameworks. Not even the admission of wrongness, which required tremendous precision to articulate and tremendous effort to deliver. This one syllable, stripped of everything, containing only the primary truth of a man who loved someone and could not save them, and then broke everything in his grief. He does not say anything in response. He understands, somehow, with the body-level understanding that good teachers and good readers and good people develop for the moments that are not made better by response, that this particular truth is not offered for the purpose of being answered. It is offered because it needed, after all this time, to be said. He stays on the floor for a while. The apartment is quiet around him. His arms ache. He stares at the ceiling. Tomorrow, Madara says finally, returning to his ordinary register with the practiced smoothness of a door being carefully closed, we will begin what you have been asking for. Body work. The physical architecture. Izuku blinks. Sits up. Really? You can see, adequately, still imperfectly, but adequately, the space around you. You have begun to understand the gap between performance and person. These are prerequisites. A pause. Also, you will destroy yourself trying to build a combat-capable body without understanding the principles behind the training. I will not watch you break your hands against problems you could have thought your way through. Izuku looks at his hands, the same hands he checked this morning, checking whether the trembling had returned, finding it absent. The same hands that are now slightly raw across the knuckles from push-ups on concrete. The same hands that have filled 13.5 notebooks with the aspirations of a person who was told he had no right to them. Okay, he says. Tomorrow. Sleep, Madara says, with the tone of someone delivering a logistics note. The body builds itself in rest. This is not optional. You sound almost concerned. I sound like someone who has spent a considerable amount of time watching people ruin their potential through insufficient recovery. A pause. Go to sleep, Midoriya. It is the first time Madara has used his name. Izuku notes this with the part of himself that notes everything. Writes it into the running archive, the subconscious index, the record that will eventually become the notebook's most carefully kept section. Files it in the category he has been building all week, The category that didn't previously exist and for which he doesn't yet have a name. The category of small, accumulating evidences that the ancient, ruined, terrifying presence behind his eyes has some remainder of something that might, under very specific circumstances and with very heavy qualification, constitute care. He climbs into bed, turns out the light, stares at the darkness where the ceiling should be. Outside, the city breathes its nighttime breath, that particular urban exhalation, the aggregate of 10 million individual lives proceeding in the dark, each one its own architecture of failure and resilience and wanting and loss and the continuous, stubborn work of continuing. He has lived inside this sound his whole life and never quite heard it the way he hears it now, not as backdrop, not as ambient evidence of a world that is happening without him, but as context, as the thing he is learning to read. I wanted to fix the broken world, Madara had said on the 5th day. I made myself the axis around which the fixing would occur. This was the first error and all the other errors followed from it. Then what's the right way to think about it? Izuku had asked. That is the question. Just that. Not an answer. The acknowledgement that the question is the point, the thing that must be kept alive, the engine of a different kind of motion than the one that ends in ruin. Izuku closes his eyes. In the darkness, he hears the city, and below the city, very quietly, the sound of something being built, not from rock this time, not from the ambition of one man trying to fix the unfixable from the outside, but from something more modest and more difficult. From the inside out. From questions rather than answers. From the architecture of a failure that, if it is looked at correctly, reveals within itself the precise shape of what it would have needed to be, in order not to fail. He is 14 years old. He has been told he cannot be a hero. He has spent 11 days learning, from the person who most completely proved what a hero is not, exactly what questions a hero needs to keep asking. He thinks, maybe this is what it means to start correctly. Not from certainty. Not from power, but from the practiced, effortful, daily discipline of refusing to stop looking at the thing you do not yet understand. His breathing slows. The city breathes outside. The presence behind his eyes settles into something that is not quite sleep. Dead men don't sleep, exactly, but acquires a quality of rest, of withdrawal, of something immense becoming briefly, compassionately less present. On the desk, the notebook sits open to the last page he wrote. In the gray light from the window, the words are barely visible. Every person who frightens you is afraid of something. Below it, a line he added after the push-ups, in writing that is slightly less steady than his usual hand, carrying the particular quality of something written from below the performance layer. I think what I've been afraid of is not the world's refusal. I think what I've been afraid of is the possibility that the refusal was right. And below that smaller, added last, it wasn't.